The movie opens up by Brian's watching a basketball game. He idolizes a player named Kevin Durant from the Thunder team. Brian was amazed to see Kevin's playing technique. Moreover, Kevin always scores a lot in every game. Seeing Kevin doing the dunks, Brian then told himself that he could do the dunks like Kevin did. So, excitedly, Brian went to his side of the house to try out dunks. But it was not as easy as he imagined. Several times the ball out of his hands. Even Brian's brother was secretly recording him while he was playing basketball. After the game is over, Kevin and his manager, Alan, will go home. Kevin has been waiting for his fans to be asked for autographs and photos. Because as usual, that night Kevin played very well. At school, Brian has a close friend named Mitch. While they were chatting, suddenly a girl passed by. Her gaze and smile fascinated Brian. This girl's name is Isabel, and she is a new student at the school. Over lunch in the school cafeteria, Brian told Mitch that he would try to get to know Isabel. At first, Mitch forbade Brian not to get acquainted with the girl, because at that school, Brian was known as a nerd boy. But according to Brian, Isabel is a new kid who doesn't know anything about him. Brian walked over to Isabel. When Brian was about to greet Isabel, suddenly a boy named Connor showed a video of Brian who was about to do a dunk like Kevin Durant by jumping on a trampoline. But apparently it wasn't the ball that went into the ring, but his feet. So that Brian caught up with the ring. Everyone who saw the video laughed and mocked Brian. Therefore, Brian did not greet Isabel.
Hey, everybody, watch this!
Brian lay on the bed contemplating his fate. Suddenly, Brian's father comes to him because he knows that his son is having a bad time at school. Therefore, his father wanted to cheer him up by taking Brian to see Kevin Durant's match live. Brian and his father then went to watch the game. When the game was paused, the MC asked the audience to take out their ticket stubs. Inside the ticket, there is a number. If the number comes out, then the ticket holder will go down to make a shot. The MC mentioned the number and it turned out to be Brian's father's ticket number. His father stood up and quickly raised Brian's hand. His father said it was Brian's number. Of course, Brian was overjoyed, and he went straight down to the court. The MC said if Brian managed to enter the ball, then he would get $20,000. At that time, it turned out that Connor was also watching. Of course, Connor had his camera ready to record Brian. Then, Brian did the shot. But unfortunately, the ball didn't go in and instead hit the mascot until it fell. With a weary face, Brian walked off the field. Unexpectedly, it turns out there is Kevin Durant. Kevin signs the basketball and gives it to Brian. Kevin said that he would make it next time. Then Brian told Kevin that he wished he had talent like him. Kevin also replied that he hoped to give Brian his talent. While giving the ball to Brian, Kevin gives motivation that hard work will beat talent. At that moment, Brian felt an energy flowing from Kevin to him. When Brian woke up from his sleep, the radio sounded saying that the Thunder team had lost badly during the match. He got out of bed and went straight to the bathroom. From here, strange things start to happen. When he entered the bathroom, Brian took off his clothes and threw them into the dirty clothes basket outside the bathroom. And everything he throws right into the basket. While at school, Brian was doing practicum. The teacher asked to take the liver. Brian took the organ and without realizing it, he was doing a spin move. His best friend was amazed to see Brian could do that. Brian also felt it was a strange thing. At night, Brian and Mitch go to the night market. When he got there, Brian saw Isabel. And next to her was Connor trying to hit a basketball for a prize. But not a single ball goes in. Brian and his best friend laughed at Connor's failure. Annoyed, Connor then told Brian to try to shoot the ball. Brian and Mitch turned to leave. But apparently, Brian immediately turned back and threw the ball, and the ball went in. Connor gave the ball back to Brian because he thought it was just a coincidence. When Brian threw the ball again, of course it went in again. Connor returned the ball a third time and went in again. An annoyed Connor then walked away. Brian got a big panda doll and he gave it to Isabel. There, Brian shook hands with Isabel and they got to know each other. They left holding the panda doll together. One time, Kevin Durant was practicing. From the results of his practice, it appears that he has not managed to enter the ball. Kevin seemed to lose his ability. And at the same time, Brian is training at home and his abilities are very much different than before. All the balls he throws in, all the techniques that Brian had not previously mastered, now he easily did. While the Eagles were practicing, Brian came. The coach asked why Brian was wearing the uniform. Brian replied that he would try to get into the team again. Of course, he was immediately rejected by his coach. But Brian tried to convince the coach that his current abilities were different. Without permission, Brian went straight into the field and then took the ball from Connor's hands and played one-on-one. Brian shows his playing skills. Everyone present was shocked and in awe. They saw Brian's abilities were different. Only Connor looked visibly annoyed. The coach and his assistant immediately intervened to be Brian's opponent. Of course, Brian easily got past the defense of the coach, assistant coach, and Connor. The coach was absolutely amazed by Brian's abilities. Brian's first match begins. He is now a main player of the Eagles team. When playing, Connor never wanted to give the ball to Brian, even though Brian was in the vacant position. Seeing that, the coach got emotional and told Connor, if he doesn't pass the ball to Brian, then Connor will be replaced. From then on, Connor passed the ball to Brian. Brian began to show his action in playing basketball. Of course, Brian immediately became a star.
That's it.
The next day, while at school, Brian became more and more famous. Everyone wants to be close to him. In every basketball game, Brian became the contributor to the highest score. Brian really became the caretaker in every Eagles team victory. In contrast to Brian, on the other hand, Kevin Durant is playing worse and worse. The media reported how bad Kevin's game was. The manager tried to do everything possible to bring Kevin's spirit back, one of which was by bringing his mother who brought Kevin's grandmother's chicken soup. On the other hand, Brian and Isabel are getting closer. They even played cards together, while Kevin is shooting a shoe ad. Many times, when doing basketball scenes with shoes that will be advertised, Kevin always falls and fails to enter the ball. The director began to feel annoyed with the scenes that Kevin failed to do. Even the basketball Kevin threw hit the director. Finally, the director stopped filming, then left and told Alan that Kevin was a total disappointment. Alan, who was in his room, was looking at a magazine that reported about Kevin. Then while Alan was watching TV, various programs showed negative comments from the presenter about Kevin. On another channel, basketball commentators are commenting on Kevin Durant's deteriorating game. When Alan changes the TV channel, he sees a news article that says that there is a local player who can become the next Durant. Alan was interested to see the news. The news anchor said the boy was the one who was shot during the Thunder game a few weeks ago. Other news said the boy must have stolen Kevin Durant's talent. Alan started looking at Kevin and Brian's videos to compare them. And it turns out that Brian really plays like Kevin. Then, one time, Alan came to watch Brian's basketball game live. Alan until surprised and amazed to see Brian's game. After watching Brian's game, Alan goes straight to Kevin and says he knows where Kevin's abilities have gone. Someone took it and it was Brian, the kid who shot during the Thunder game. Alan said before Brian met Kevin, Brian's game really sucks. Kevin of course did not believe what Alan said because it was impossible. Kevin appreciates what Alan did, but according to him, if Alan has such thoughts, then he guarantees Alan will be fired. Brian and Isabel were hanging out together. While they were chatting, Alan came and disturbed them. Brian and Isabel didn't seem happy with Alan's arrival, but that changed after Alan introduced that he was Kevin Durant's manager. Brian was feeling very happy. The next day, Alan and Kevin came to Brian's school. Kevin found it strange because previously Alan said that they would conduct a community outreach program for underprivileged schools. But apparently it was just Alan's trick to get Kevin to change his mind and believe, in his words, that Kevin's talent was taken by Brian. Kevin and Alan entered Brian's classroom. Then Alan explained that they were conducting a community outreach program. Because at that time there was a math class and there was a question on the blackboard, Alan immediately asked Brian to come forward and answer the question. Kevin said the boy was the one who shot during the Thunder game. But Alan pretended not to know it was Brian. Kevin then greeted Brian. Alan immediately grabbed Kevin and Brian's hands and swung them around. Alan hopes that with that, Kevin's talent will come back again. Even Alan tried to grab Kevin's hand and swing to high-five each other. Then Alan told Kevin to throw the paper in the trash. But his talent still hasn't returned. Alan then asked Kevin and Brian to go out together. When Kevin and Brian were in the cafeteria, all the kids gathered and watched them. While walking, Alan tried to pull Kevin's hand to hold Brian's body. Even on the way home, Alan said that they would give away free boots to Team Eagles. After giving the shoes, Alan pulled Brian to take a picture with Kevin. Here, Alan is really trying to get Kevin's abilities back again. On the way home, Alan asked Kevin how he feels around Brian. Alan asked if anything had changed in Kevin. Kevin looks annoyed and angry with Alan. Kevin then said that he actually knew everyone was laughing at his game. But Alan's current efforts were useless. This time, Brian is playing and he looks very confident. Not only that, Brian started being selfish by not passing the ball to Connor and his teammates. Meanwhile, In other places, Kevin is also competing. But like the previous game, Kevin's game is very bad. Commentators say the Thunder team is on the verge of defeat. This is the complete destruction of Kevin Durant. Brian is partying with his friends. There, Isabel began to feel uncomfortable with Brian's arrogant attitude. Isabel immediately walked to leave. Then Brian chased after her asking what was wrong. Isabel then asked him to chat elsewhere. But before they could speak, Brian immediately went to be picked up by his friends, and Isabel immediately left the place. On the other hand, Mitch, who was cleaning up a t-shirt with Brian's face on it, called Brian to remind him that they were going to an event. But apparently, Brian was too busy to go out with Mitch. Brian and his friends are having fun when a voice says that his parents are coming. The children who were there ran to hide. But it turned out to be Alan. He says that Brian must bring back Kevin Durant's talent. Brian was confused by what Alan said. Later, Alan asked Brian if he didn't find this all odd. Like Brian's talent suddenly different from before. Alan asked what the average score was Brian before and after he met Kevin. Brian replied that he had never been on the team before, and now he has 48 points from a game. Alan said that was the case. Kevin never failed to get a point, but now Kevin couldn't score a single point. Alan then said that the talent that Brian had now was not his. Oklahoma people who love Team Thunder and Kevin will be disappointed if the Thunder team loses. After saying that, Alan left. The Eagles coach is making a speech on the basketball court. There, they will prepare for the playoffs for the first time. When one by one the players are called, here Brian meets Isabel. The girl said maybe after the season is over, then they will both go back. Brian then says it was because of basket that Isabel started to notice him. Isabel replied that she had been watching Brian since the first day he walked down the hall. And just then, Brian was by the locker and talking to Mitch. Obviously, it's not because of basketball. Outside, the coach and the fans kept calling out to Brian. Isabel told him to leave. After their event, Brian asked the coach how well he was playing in the team. But the coach ignored it and asked Brian to focus, because he was already there. The next day, while Brian was pedaling his bike, he stopped and saw a poster of Kevin Durant's face. Staring at the poster, Brian then called Alan and asked to pick him up. Alan and Brian came to Kevin, who was practicing. Kevin asks why Brian came. And Brian replied that he wanted to give Kevin's talent back. Kevin then asked Alan, was he the one who told Brian to believe that nonsense? But Alan immediately pushed Brian to start showing his abilities. Alan asked Brian to show Kevin the usual moves. Even Brian showed special moves that only Kevin Durant could do, While making that move, Kevin was dumbfounded. Alan started telling Kevin and Brian to hold the basketball together and say what they said earlier. Kevin gave the basketball to prove whether it had worked. Alan asked them to fire. But it turned out that way didn't work. Various ways were done to get Kevin's ability back, but all to no avail. Brian later said that he didn't do it on purpose. And Kevin understands. According to Kevin, he might have to start all over again. Then Kevin left from there. Brian then came to Isabel's house. There, Brian apologizes and says that his abilities and Kevin Durant's abilities have been swapped. Brian shows the video to Isabel. He convinces him, but while watching the video back, Brian realized that at that time the ball he threw hit the mascot's head until he fainted. And that's what makes his talent swapped. Brian quickly pedaled his bike to where Kevin was competing. At that time, the points of the Thunder team were far behind from the opposing team. At the end of the first half, Brian, who was in a hurry, rushed in with his bicycle. Brian even crossed the court and was chased by the Thunder mascot. Of course, Brian calls Kevin and tells him that he has to take down the mascot called Rumble with the ball. Because the mascot was chasing Brian, then Brian immediately threw the ball at Rumble until it fell. After that, they hold the ball together and say what they said before in reverse. An energy was seen flowing. When the second half began, unexpectedly, Kevin's ability returned again. He immediately scored a lot of points and finally the Thunder team was able to win. Meanwhile, Brian trains at his home. When making a shot, the ball does not go in. And when Brian was at school, Mitch saw Brian coming. But he immediately looked away. Feeling his best friend drifting away, Brian went over to Mitch to chat with him. But Mitch ignored him. I know what I'm doing is annoying, says Brian. Mitch actually couldn't ignore his best friend for too long. They immediately reconciled. Brian and his team are getting ready to compete. Brian looked uninspired because he already knew that his game would be bad. When the game started, Brian made a lot of mistakes and he couldn't score anymore. The coach then asked for a timeout. Brian also asked himself to sit on the bench only, but his coach refused because Brian was a key player in their team's victory. In the middle of the game, Kevin Durant and Alan came to watch. Kevin gives Brian the coat and makes Brian excited again. Brian and his friends gather and share the strategies they will use in the game. And sure enough, even though Brian can't hit the ball, he can be a grabber and a passer. With good cooperation, the Eagles team began to score a lot of points in the last 15 seconds. When Brian is holding the ball, he looks hesitant to make a shot. But because there was no more time to pass, he finally made a three-point shot. And unexpectedly, it made it in. In the end, the Eagles managed to win. Everyone cheered. Brian then saluted Kevin Durant.